We turn to China, which itself is hosting a raft of African heavyweights itself this week. A China-Africa summit kicked off on Wednesday. China is the continent's top bilateral lender, and many of the heads of state in Beijing are hoping to nurture a relationship upon which many have relied for the creation of huge infrastructure projects in Africa over the years, even if the figures have been lower as China feels its own domestic financial pressures. Our Yenna Lee was at the opening of the summit.
Beijing has been touting the Forum on China-Africa Cooperation as the biggest international event it has hosted in several years. Indeed, 24 African heads of state are here and have had face-to-face meetings with President Xi Jinping. And though everybody has their own bilateral relationship with China, there are some continent-wide concerns, mainly linked to Africa's $64 billion trade deficit with the Asian giant. Delegations from the continent are also here to attract more Chinese investment. China, meanwhile, is looking to import minerals, export green technology, whilst promoting its vision for the world. You can expect to hear the phrase South-South cooperation throughout the week as Beijing tries to emphasize that trade with them is not quite like trading with other big players. And like at the last summit, we can see that big infrastructure projects are no longer being talked about loudly and proudly. Now, Beijing prefers to promote what it calls small and beautiful projects. That said, on the sidelines of the forum, China, Tanzania and Zambia have already signed an initial deal to refurbish an old railway line connecting the two East African nations. Almost every country from the continent has sent a delegation here to China, except Eswatini, that didn't get an invite due to its diplomatic ties with Taiwan. Now, ahead of the summit, I actually sat down with a Chinese importer of Kenyan flowers to ask her about the impact of new fast-track customs policies on her business. Huang Jinan first visited a Kenyan flower farm in 2018. Impressed by the quality of the blooms, she later started an import business back home.
This yellow rose is my favorite. It's also quite popular.
On average, she sells 100,000 stems a month, mostly wholesale, to major cities around China.
They're larger than my fist and they have a strong scent.
Her business got a recent boost from a Beijing policy change that slashed red tape for African agricultural and horticultural imports.
We have access to the green lanes for customs clearance. It only takes 17 hours for the flowers to get here from Kenya.
The Green Lane policy was launched in 2021 here in Hunan province. 16 new African products have since entered the Chinese market, compared to 11 products over the previous 2 decades. But the measures only go so far. The trade deficit between Africa and its largest trading partner keeps growing. Some economists say the imbalance can only be tackled if the continent diversifies its economies to produce more value-added goods.
This is something that is a Pan-African collective position that we want to move away from the trade of raw commodities. So to give a very simple example, instead of just exporting cocoa beans, we also want to be exporting chocolate.
Another battle for African exporters is for Beijing to recognize products unique to their place of origin.
So similar to how Italian prosciutto is protected by geographical indications, we have teas such as South Africa's rooibos tea, which can only be produced in South Africa. Presently, these are not protected.
Though trade between the two reached a record $282 billion in 2023, Africa's trade deficit with China increased almost 37% in 1 year.